three, we need to talk about ideas and where they come from. Now, most people never really thought about this. Where does an idea come from? Well, ideas are not born from nothing. Ideas are born from two or more parents. Ideas come from taking two or more existing concepts and combining those, melding those together, synthesizing those into something brand new. And so I'm telling you this now because this is an important point to keep in mind as I'm talking about characteristic number three, which again is a big part of the lifestyle. Okay, we've talked about the mindset. The mindset is you're a risk taker. You have a great self-belief, but now we're getting into the lifestyle. The creative thinkers, innovators expose themselves to as many different viewpoints and new stimuli as they possibly can. In other words, they try to experience as many new things as they possibly can. To have it, whenever you have a new experience, you literally lay down new neural pathways in your brain. You open up new electrical connections between the brain cells in your brain, and you're giving yourself more brain capacity, more to think with, and more data to draw on, more things that you can combine and connect to create new ideas. That's why this is a very important characteristic. It's an extremely important habit that innovators have. So this is a big thing that I want to encourage you to do. Now, you might be thinking, now, you're going to probably have to force yourself to start trying some new things. And I know what you're thinking. Okay, come on, Rob, I haven't got time. I've got my job, I've got my family, and you've already told me at the beginning of this speech that you wanted me to spend more time on my hobby. When am I supposed to try new things? I've got you covered. I got you covered. Now, scientists have already said recently that there's no such thing as multitasking. Guess what? I'm going to give you a way to do some real actual multitasking and expose yourself to new things while you're already doing something that you would do every single day. Okay, this first technique is very easy. Whenever you're in the car, instead of listening to what you normally listen to on the radio, I want you to change to a different genre. Okay, if you listen to rock and roll all the time, for the next month, I want you to listen to country music or to jazz or to classical music. Now, what's going to happen is you're going to be exposing yourself to new things. And if it's a commercial station, you're going to be getting new information because you're going to hear different advertisements. They advertise different things to these people who are into different stuff. So do that for a month and then actually do it every other month. Switch to a new musical genre so you're constantly exposing yourself to new stuff. Go back to your stuff for a month, then take a month with something new. Okay, that's your first technique. All right. The second one is next time you're at a place that sells magazines, if it's the bookstore or if it's the pharmacy or if it's the grocery store, I want you to go to the magazine rack. And I want you to look at all the different topics, and I want you to pick 3 or 4 magazines on subjects you know nothing about. All right? And then it could be anything. It could be something you want to know more about, but know nothing about, or it could be something you choose at random. Pick something, butterflies, knitting, bird watching, motorcycle riding, target shooting, whatever it may be. Get 3 or 4 magazines, take them home and put them on top of your toilet tank. That's right. You're just going to be sitting there anyway. You might as well be exposing yourself, pun intended, to new information and different viewpoints. And anyway, so there are 2 ways you are multitasking in reality and exposing yourself to new things, new information, and building that brain power of yours so that you have more data to work with in creating some new ideas. Now, I have 4 minutes left. I'm going to see if I can tell you one closing story to really drive home this concept, this idea of reading a magazine you've never read before. Now, this is a story about my parents, and it's sometimes difficult to tell because my parents are gone, and they've been gone for a while. And while it's a story about my dad, it's primarily a story about my mother. Now, I've got to give you some background on my mother to make this story make sense. Now, my mother was an avid reader. a voracious reader. Whenever she had a spare minute, she had her nose stuck in a book. But there was something unusual about the way she read. She would only read nonfiction. Now, I found this out one day in high school. I came home from school, said, Mom, I've just read the best book. It's this novel. It's about blah, blah, blah. She goes, stop right there. I don't read fiction. She goes, give me something good for my mind. Give me some nonfiction. She actually said that. Give me something good for my mind. I mean, who says that? Well, I wouldn't understand why she said that until several years later when I learned more about her background. And here's her background. She grew up during the Depression. Neither one of her parents had more than an 8th grade education. She grew up in a blue-collar family, and her parents weren't really encouraging her to go very far with her education, because they were saying to her what many women heard growing up was, you're just going to get married anyway, at least back in those days. But she did. She finished high school. She went to college for 1 year, and she became an X-ray technician. And we've got something on here that needs to be muted. Can I do that? All right. Anyway, so she married my father. She married into a family of professionals, a family of doctors, lawyers, engineers, and accountants, and a mother-in-law who really thought my father married a little too far down the social economic ladder. Yeah, that was my grandma. You know, a little bit of a snob there. And so my mother, as she joined in some of the family gatherings, she found that she had a hard time keeping up with the conversations. She was very intimidated by the education deficit that she had compared to her in-laws, and she was determined to eliminate that. So she started reading as much as she could to make up for the fact that she had that lack of education. Now, that's the background of the story. Here's the story. In 1960, my father was diagnosed with kidney failure. Now, I was a toddler at the time. I was 3 years old. I didn't know really what was going on, but what I can tell you is what I remember from that time is that my strong daddy could no longer pick me up and carry me anymore. I noticed that he didn't go to work as often as he used to, that he would have to spend the entire day in the bed, or he would spend it on the sofa. And I noticed that my mother had taken over all of the driving, and that sometimes she had to pull off on the side of the road so that he could throw up. What I didn't know is what the doctors told my father. They said, Mr. Wilson, you have kidney failure. You have less than a year to live. You need to start making your plans. So that's what they did. My father was a builder, so he sold the family house and used the proceeds to build a 3-unit apartment house with the idea that my mother, my sister, and I would live in 1 unit and partially live off the rents of the other 2. Now, the other plans involved my mother. And so she had been a stay-home mom, had not worked in years. So she started taking some temporary jobs to start beefing up her skills and developing a network, because the plan was that when that inevitable day came that my father passed, she would start working part-time until my sister and I were old enough to go to school, and then she would start working full-time. And in the meantime, at these temporary jobs, she was beefing up her skills, developing a network so that she could find that permanent job when she needed it. But something interesting happened one day at one of those temp jobs. There was 2 hours of downtime. I don't remember what the reason was, if it was a quality issue or if there was, what it was, but she had 2 hours with nothing to do. So she went into the doctor's office lobby for a magazine. She went up to the magazine rack and she scanned the top shelves, which had all of the popular magazines of the day. And she passed over those and went down to the bottom shelf when she noticed a several months out of date copy of the New England Journal of Medicine. So she picked that up and started reading it. And after a few minutes, she realized she was reading an article about some physicians in Boston that were doing some experimental surgery. Well, the experimental surgery they were doing was the world's first organ transplants. And as she read on, she read that the organ they were transplanting was the kidney. Well, at this point, she was now reading with a great deal of intensity. And as she read on, she read that they, at least when the magazine came out, that they had been looking for volunteers. But there was a catch. The volunteers had to have an identical twin. My father just happened to have an identical twin. And at that point, she put the magazine down. She went right to the telephone, started calling Boston until she got one of those physicians on the phone. And when she did, the physician answered. He goes, "Yes, Mrs. Wilson, we are still looking for volunteers. Please send me your husband and his brother." So that night, my father and my mother went to visit my uncle, and my uncle said, "To save your life, absolutely, you can have a kidney." So I tell you this story because if my mother had not had a lifelong habit of exposing herself to new things, my father would never have become the 12th person in the world to have a kidney transplant and live. And I wouldn't have gotten my father for another 18 years. You see, when you begin to take on the characteristics of creative thinkers and innovators, when you begin to think like them, you will recognize opportunities that others will miss. You will be able to deal with change better than ever. You will think faster on your feet and solve more problems than ever before. I'd like to thank you so much for having me here this evening. It's been a pleasure talking with you.